The last time I saw my family before everything blew up, my sister called me an embarrassment in a thrift store blazer, and my mom said she wouldn't be caught dead sitting in the same pew as me. It was my niece's baptism, and they made sure I wasn't in a single photo. That day, I sat alone in the last row, listening to people whisper about how I couldn't even keep a job, let alone a man. No one asked how I was surviving after being laid off. No one noticed the bruises I was hiding, emotional ones, the kind that don't show on skin. Then, years later, I walked into a gala, uninvited, just to hear my sister's senator friend joke about me being the family's cautionary tale. But when she turned, her laughter froze. Her eyes scanned me up and down, and in front of everyone she whispered, stunned, "You're the mayor?" That moment didn't just silence the room. It dragged every buried memory to the surface. The shame, the hunger, the nights I cried in borrowed parking lots. All of it. And I stood there, not as the girl they discarded, but as the woman who outlived their judgment. You're wondering how I got there? Let me take you back to where it all began. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. And if this story speaks to you, hit subscribe so we can keep walking through this together. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. 3 years. That's how long I'd managed to avoid walking through those iron-wrought gates and stepping into the Doyle family mansion. But this year, something pulled me back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe loneliness. Maybe some foolish hope that absence had softened their edges. I came alone, balancing a homemade pumpkin pie on my lap during the drive into Omaha. I'd spent the morning baking it. Nutmeg, ginger, a hint of maple. Something about contributing, even in small ways, made me feel useful. I barely had the chance to set it down before my mother, Sharon, glanced over and said in her ever-gracious tone, "We ordered from Behringer's this year, dear. You can leave it in the kitchen." So I did. I left the pie like a forgotten gift on the counter, right next to a tower of catered dishes with silver lids. Then I found my seat, 4 chairs down from the end of the table, where the lighting dimmed and no one raised their glass in my direction when the toast began. Juliet was in full bloom that night. My younger sister always knew how to occupy a room. She wore a deep emerald dress and a gold eagle brooch. Rick's gift, no doubt. She mentioned it twice. Rick Langley, the rising star senator, was beside her. All stiff smiles and camera-ready cadence. You never got the sense he was talking to you. He was rehearsing for C-SPAN. Always. Juliet led the first toast. To family, to ambition, to doing what others say can't be done. She smiled in Rick's direction, and everyone laughed like that was the punchline. Then, the attention shifted back to her. Lawyer of the Year, 40 under 40. And apparently, the savior of the entire Doyle lineage. No one toasted to me, not a word about where I'd been, what I'd been through. When someone did acknowledge my existence, it was with a pat of polite confusion. Rowena still lives by that cornfield, right? Teaching part-time? Or did she stop that too? Juliet handed me her wine glass without looking. Can you fill this for me? And maybe help Mom in the kitchen. I'm mid-conversation with Rick's media liaison. I stood, smiled, took the glass. What else could I do? In the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the chrome fridge. Tired eyes, a threadbare sweater I had tried to dress up with a brooch of my own. Then I saw it. Wedged between magazines and old mail, a wrinkled copy of Midwest Today. Headline torn in half. All that remained, Deputy Director accused of misuse. I knew the rest by heart. I'd been the Deputy Director of District Education, until 3 years ago, when whispers about misuse of travel grants surfaced. Research trips that were supposed to be policy reviews had been spun into lavish excursions. I had receipts, reports, clearance. But it didn't matter. Politics rarely listens to reason. Sharon had intervened. The story disappeared overnight. But so did I. The price of silence was steep. I was never to return to public office, never to drag the Doyle name through the mud again. The problem was, I had believed I did the right thing, that I fought for programs that mattered. But in that house, truth was just noise beneath reputation. Later that night, I drove back to my modest rental on the edge of town. The kitchen smelled like cloves from the pie I never served. On the porch sat a cardboard envelope, damp at the edges from dew, no return address. Inside, a handwritten letter, ink slightly smudged but the words clear. Ms. Doyle, Knox Hill remembers you. Our mayor stepped down. Under investigation. We're holding a special election. You once taught us to stand up for what's right. Now, we want to stand behind you. Ryder Hennings, town manager. I stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled. Not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in years, the weight of being needed for the right reasons. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of the humiliation I'd endured at that dinner table, but because of the quiet possibility beginning to bloom in my chest. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't want to prove them wrong. I just wanted to remember who I used to be, before I let shame wear my name. The roads to Knox Hill hadn't changed much, still winding like a lazy river through the low hills, still flanked by wind-worn barns and rusted grain silos. But as I drove past the Welcome to Knox Hill sign, faded and half covered in vines, something shifted in me. This wasn't just a detour anymore. It was a return, a reckoning. The town where I used to teach, where my name still echoed faintly in the elementary halls, was now asking me to come back. Not as a teacher this time, but as their mayor. The old chapel was still standing. So was the post office with its sun-stained bricks and the makeshift basketball court behind the volunteer fire station. A man with a long white beard at the gas station squinted at me, then let out a sharp laugh. Well, I'll be... Miss Rowena? Ain't seen you since my grandson was failing spelling. He didn't ask about the rumors. He didn't bring up the resignation. He just smiled like someone who'd been waiting for good news that finally showed up in person. I had no campaign, no posters, no website, no volunteer team, just a secondhand printer and a vision. I printed my own flyers, blurry, black and white, half smudged by the time I folded them. I walked door to door, through snow-damp sidewalks and cracked porches. No speeches, no slogans, just a promise to listen and to serve. One of my first gatherings wasn't even in a building. It was on a weed-choked lot behind an abandoned diner. I stood on a stack of broken concrete and talked about turning that space into a public park. A girl no older than 9 sat on the edge of a rusted swing frame. She pointed at the snapped chain. If you're mayor, can you fix this? I crouched beside her, fingers brushing the cold metal. Yes, but not alone. We'll fix it together. Election night wasn't a frenzy. I didn't have a headquarters. I was at Ray's diner, eating a turkey sandwich that had more lettuce than meat. Across from me, the screen above the soda fountain played a live stream run by 2 high schoolers, broadcasting the county's official ballot count. My name wasn't even printed on the ballot. I had to rely on write-ins. Each precinct update felt like watching your name scratched into history in real time, or forgotten just as easily. Then came the last screen. I dropped my sandwich. The number glowed like a dare. Rowena Doyle, 63.7% write-in votes. The waitress gasped. Someone in a booth clapped slowly. And somewhere on Reddit, a clip began to spread. an old man in a knit cap saying, "She didn't put up billboards. She taught my grandson how to read. That's the kind of mayor we need, not the ones who walk fast and listen slow." By morning, local news had picked it up. "The write-in nobody saw coming," one headline read. I didn't feel like a political wave. I felt like a ripple finally reaching shore. Juliet didn't call. She texted, "Chijang kolam gijai." That was it. No congratulations, no questions, just that familiar tone of controlled alarm. A week later, I was invited, technically, mistakenly, into a regional conference in Lincoln, the kind where officials pat each other's backs and pretend their counties don't share water issues. I stood in the back, sipping bad coffee, when the MC misread the attendance sheet. And now joining us, please welcome the newly elected mayor of Knox Hill, Rowena Doyle. All eyes turned. I felt the air hitch. Then I saw him, Rick Langley, standing near the front with Juliet. He turned. His gaze started at my boots and crawled up, searching for something recognizable. "Wait, you're the mayor?" There was a silence so sharp it echoed. Juliet looked down at her glass of red wine, swirling it slowly as if she could pretend not to hear. Not to feel what I already knew. This was the beginning of the shift. Not in power, not in wealth, but in something deeper. Recognition. I didn't need them to applaud. I just needed them to witness. The first week in office didn't come with parades or photo ops, no press conferences, just work. That was the only thing I knew how to do. Head down, hands in the dirt. Knox Hill didn't need a speechwriter. It needed clean water. The pipes were old, corroded, seeping traces of lead into school fountains and kitchen taps. I met with the county engineers, reviewed the grant applications myself, and when the numbers didn't add up, I called every contact I still had left in education and public health until we found a workaround. No one clapped, but the new filters arrived a week early. While the water was being fixed, I focused on something quieter, but just as urgent: our students. Too many rural kids in Nebraska fall through the cracks, smart kids with no path forward. I set up a scholarship fund for high school seniors who couldn't afford the application fees, let alone college tuition. I didn't wait for a big donor. I put the first 1,000 in myself. In the afternoons, I changed out of my blazer, tied up my sleeves, and joined a small team of volunteers to rebuild the old park behind the diner. The same park where, 15 years ago, I used to sit on the ground with second graders, reading Charlotte's Web under the cottonwood trees. The swing frame was still there, tilted, rusted, half buried in weeds. But we cleared the lot, painted, hammered, sanded, and little by little, the place came alive again. One morning, as I was sorting donation receipts in my office above the Old Town Bakery, a man knocked gently and stepped inside. Gray in his beard, denim jacket worn thin. I didn't recognize him until he smiled. "Kokon no Rider Kong?" he asked. I blinked. Rider? And then I saw it. Those same wide eyes, the slight tilt in his chin when he was nervous. "You were the one always reading under your desk." He laughed. "Still do, but now it's contracts instead of comic books." He sat down and leaned forward. "I was the one who organized the petition. The letter you got? That was me." I didn't know what to say. "I heard about what happened," he added, softer now. "Back then, the resignation, the budget scandal. I didn't believe it. You used your own money to buy us books." I remembered that. I looked away. No one had said that to me in years, not even my own family. When Ryder left, I sat there for a long time, until the sun dipped behind the trees and the town outside went quiet. That's when I saw the envelope on my desk. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in the elegant cursive I'd seen on countless birthday cards to Juliet, but never once addressed to me. Inside, one folded page. Rowena, greater than... I'm not writing to apologize. I know it's far too late for that. Greater than... I just want to say, whatever dignity you now carry, whatever honor they attribute to you, it doesn't come from us. It was always yours. Greater than... And maybe it's time I said that out loud. Greater than... Mother. The paper shook in my hands. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it didn't try to make anything okay. It didn't rewrite the past. It just acknowledged it. For once, she wasn't speaking as the composed matriarch or the crisis smoother. She was just Sharon, and that was enough. I folded the letter back carefully and slipped it into my drawer, next to my voter registration and the flyer for the town's first community garden. That weekend, the new park opened. Kids ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter bouncing off the trees like church bells. I came early, before the ribbon cutting, and sat beside the new swing set on a stone bench we'd just finished sanding the day before. I pulled out my pocket knife and slowly carved a message into the bench, steady and clear. You don't need their permission to belong. Later that afternoon, as I wiped off the stone dust, a small girl wandered over, no older than 7. She tilted her head, reading the inscription aloud, then looked up at me. Who are you? I smiled, brushing the dust from my jeans. Just someone cleaning up a bit of mess, I said. She nodded like that made perfect sense and climbed onto the swing. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was fixing something broken. I felt like I was finally building something whole. I never saw myself as a congressional candidate. I was a teacher, a reluctant mayor, a woman who fixed swings and negotiated waterline repairs, not someone who gave speeches behind podiums draped in red, white, and blue. But one Wednesday morning, I found myself sitting in the back booth of Joni's Diner, across from 3 Democratic leaders from the state. They ordered black coffee and spoke in the measured tones of men used to shaping futures. You represent something we've forgotten, one said. The part of Nebraska that doesn't get mentioned in campaign ads. You're not a product. We need that now, more than ever. I didn't answer right away. My instincts told me to run the other way. Politics at the national level was a different world, one where people like Rick Langley thrived, polished and venomous. But I remembered the swing, the girl who asked who I was, the letter from my mother. Slowly, I nodded. We launched the campaign from the same modest corner where my mayoral journey began. No consultants, no glittering launch party. Just a handwritten sign, Rowena Doyle, let the truth run rural. I drove from town to town in a borrowed pickup, hosted conversations in church basements, school auditoriums, even a grain warehouse converted into a community center. I didn't give speeches, I listened. When farmers talked about the price of diesel or nurses about losing funding, I wrote it down. I made promises I could keep. And for a while, it felt like we were building something good. Until we found out who I was really running against. Troy Harkins was the sort of candidate money could polish to a gleam. Suits cut too sharp, smile rehearsed, net worth deep. He'd never worked a public job in his life, but claimed he'd bring business sense to Washington. A quick look at his donor list told us everything we needed to know. His campaign was heavily bankrolled by a PAC linked to Rick Langley. Rick, my sister's husband. The man who once stared me down in a banquet hall and asked, "Wait, you're the mayor?" It would have been laughable if it didn't sting so deeply. Juliet, of course, made it worse. She appeared in one of Harkins's sleek campaign videos, standing in front of a skyline, hair perfect, voice calm. Troy Harkins is the future Nebraska deserves, she said. Modern thinking, results-driven. She never once mentioned that her own sister was running. 3 weeks before the election, the first hit piece landed. Anonymous flyers scattered across grocery store windshields, slipped into mailboxes like poison. They used my old school photo, grainy and unflattering, with a headline that made my stomach turn. Rowena Doyle, ousted for embezzlement. A website popped up overnight, filled with old documents, red underlines, even doctored emails. One page titled "The Smile of a Liar" featured a still image of me from years ago, mid-laugh, twisted now into something sinister. We knew who was behind it. No proof, but no doubt. My campaign team panicked. Should we take legal action? Go silent? Call a press conference? But I'd been silenced before. That wasn't happening again. I scheduled a town hall live stream the next night. No scripts, no PR team. Just me in front of a webcam in the Knox Hill Library, with the town seal behind me and an old, dusty copy of the Constitution on the table beside me. "I'm not perfect," I began, "but I'm not a thief. I was asked years ago to sign off on a questionable expense. I said no, and for that, I was pushed out. I stayed silent to protect people who didn't deserve it. I won't do that again." I paused, looked directly into the lens. "You don't have to believe my words. Ask this town what I've done. Ask the kids I taught to read, the families who now have safe water, the mother whose daughter plays in the park we rebuilt. I don't run to be applauded. I run because I still believe in what's possible when we stop letting liars define the truth." By morning, the video had over 200,000 views. By the weekend, farmers in dusty jeans stood beside volunteers in college hoodies, handing out homemade flyers that said, "Rowena stands with us." And slowly, the tide turned. They tried to bury me in the past. Instead, I planted my feet in it and used it to rise. I wore the same olive green suit I used to wear as a school principal. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't new, but it was mine. The sleeves still bore faint creases from years of raising my hand to quiet a class or explain a budget to a skeptical parent. It felt right as I stepped into the chamber for my swearing in. No entourage, no dramatic music, no family applause from the gallery. Just Ryder, a handful of volunteers from Knox Hill, and a quiet promise in my heart. I would make this place mean something. As I raised my hand and took the oath, a reporter whispered behind me, "Isn't that Langley's sister-in-law?" I didn't flinch. I wasn't here because of Rick Langley. I was here to spite him. From my first week in Congress, I brought one idea to every table: the Community Education Network. It was simple in theory but ambitious in scope. Build modern tuition-free public schools across rural districts, connected to local industries, trades, and farms. Not charter schools, not corporate-funded experiments. Actual schools, run by communities, for communities. I didn't pitch it with graphs or market buzzwords. I showed them photos of broken gym floors and empty bookshelves. I played a voice memo from a single mother in Knox Hill saying, "If I could get my boy to a school like that, he wouldn't just survive, he'd thrive." To my surprise, the idea took root. Professors from land-grant colleges signed on. Farmers offered space for pilot programs. Even a few cautious centrists leaned in. For the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, I was doing more than surviving Washington. I was shaping it. Then Rick reappeared. He held a press conference flanked by polished aides, warning the public about an underdeveloped proposal that could balloon the federal deficit. He never named me. He didn't have to. The headlines did it for him. "Family divide in Washington. Langley counters sister-in-law's spending bill." I became a story again, but not the kind I wanted. The real blow came during a budget hearing. I stood to argue for reallocating funds from outdated industrial subsidies to pilot schools in low-income counties. Rick cut in smoothly, his tone weaponized with concern. And how do we trust a budget proposal from someone once investigated for financial mismanagement? The room went silent. Staffers looked up from their screens. My chest tightened, but I held my ground. There's a difference, I said, between being investigated and being buried. I let that hang in the air. And I wasn't the one hiding. Even the stenographer paused. Later that evening, I walked back to my office to find a thick binder on my desk, marked Fiscal Accountability Oversight Review. It was the beginnings of a challenge to my bill, pages of legal jargon and red lines, prepared not by Rick's office, but a so-called nonpartisan fiscal group. It took Ryder 3 phone calls and one late-night pizza bribe to a junior staffer to find the truth. Juliet was working behind the scenes with the group's legal team. Her name wasn't listed publicly, but her signature was on internal memos. My own sister had helped assemble the argument to dismantle my proposal. A columnist from the Lincoln Register summed it up with cruel precision. In the Doyle family, even a federal education bill is grounds for civil war. I stared at the headline longer than I care to admit. Not because it hurt, but because it was starting to feel familiar. Like I'd stepped into a play already written, roles carved in stone. Rick, the golden son-in-law turned gatekeeper. Juliet, the silent blade behind the curtain. And me, the outlier who kept insisting on standing where I didn't belong. But I knew better now. Belonging wasn't a gift you got from family, or from party lines. It was something you claimed. One bill, one school, one swing repaired at a time. I announced my campaign for governor of Nebraska standing beside a wind turbine in Kearney, boots covered in prairie dust and eyes fixed on the horizon. I didn't wait for consultants or focus groups. I didn't ask permission. I simply stood there, looked into the crowd of farmers, students, welders, and nurses, and said, I'm not running to keep a seat warm in Washington. I'm running to ignite something right here. I called it Project Horizon. 3 pillars: green energy, universal education, and a digital rural economy. The plan was bold, and I made no attempt to water it down. We'll turn the empty fields into solar grids, connect the smallest counties to high-speed internet, and train every high schooler with tools that actually serve their future. No more charity handouts, no more being left behind. Support came fast and raw. The State Teachers Union endorsed me within a week. Co-ops offered to host energy pilot programs. Even immigrant advocacy groups, usually wary of political pledges, stood beside me, saying this was the first time someone had shown up with blueprints instead of slogans. But then came the headlines. It started as whispers on niche local blogs. Project Horizon receives illegal foreign contributions. A week later, the same claim landed in several regional outlets, all citing a confidential insider as their source. They accused my campaign of laundering donations through nonprofit education initiatives. No real names, no hard evidence, but just enough smoke to invite suspicion. I knew this tactic. Manufactured doubt, cloaked as concern. A cut too familiar to be random. Then, a ping. It was an encrypted message from Jenna Teal, the same independent journalist who'd once defended me during the congressional race. She wasn't one to mince words. Rowena, I traced ownership of the media company that published the first article. Juliet holds a 23% stake. Quiet. Tied through a shell entity in Illinois. Your sister is backing the smear. I stared at the screen, numb. I didn't reply. What was there to say? That weekend, I had a town hall in Lincoln. Packed church hall, folding chairs, cheap mics, and standing near the back, in a sleek camel coat, was Juliet. She didn't speak. She didn't blink, but our eyes met, and stayed locked for far too long. Her look wasn't regret. It wasn't guilt. It was control. Cold, practiced control. I finished the event like nothing had happened. I shook hands, took photos, thanked the volunteers. But inside, I could feel it, the needle slipping deeper. This wasn't just a difference of values. This was a war for legacy. Juliet had always played the long game. She didn't need to beat me in a debate. She only needed to bury the ground I was building on. Days later, Rick gave an interview on CNN. Smooth as ever, dressed in his favorite navy pinstripe. When asked about the upcoming gubernatorial race, he chuckled. It's concerning when individuals who've struggled with financial integrity now aspire to control a state's budget. Ambition is admirable, but it needs grounding in reality. The host nodded. The segment ended. And I sat there, watching it on mute from a cafe near the Platte River, with an untouched sandwich and a heart that felt too tight for my chest. But I didn't back down. Let them come. Let them dig. Because every lie they printed made the people who actually mattered show up louder, prouder, and angrier. And if Juliet wanted to play behind curtains and Rick wanted to poke from his throne, I'd give them a new kind of campaign. One that didn't wait to be invited to the table. One that built a new one in the middle of the field. The storm outside my campaign felt like thunder without rain. Loud, constant, and strangely hollow. My team was on edge. Every morning brought a new editorial, a new rumor, a new clip replayed out of context on a podcast or live stream. The whispers had grown teeth, and those teeth were biting. Some of my senior staff gathered in the back room of our field office in Lincoln and dropped a folder on the table. Inside, proof that Rick had authored a budget amendment years ago that redirected federal disaster relief funds into a PAC he controlled through intermediaries. "We leak this," one of them said, "and it's over. He'll have to spend the rest of the race defending it." I stared at the papers, the dates, the emails with subject lines like redirect and expedite. I closed the folder. "I'm not here to play their game," I said quietly. "I won't use the same blade they used to gut me." Some sighed, some looked angry, but no one argued. Because they knew I meant it. That didn't mean the knives weren't out. Social media exploded with division. Some said I was too soft to go against the moneyed machine, too idealistic, too polite. Others began organizing in their own way, turning frustration into movement. Hashtags started trending. We choose horizon, truth without permission. They weren't just defending me, they were claiming a new kind of campaign, one that didn't punch to win, but lifted to lead. Then came the debate. Live on PBS, standing beside Ted Hargrove, Republican firebrand, darling of conservative super paces, and walking soundbite. He leaned into the mic with the poise of someone used to applause before finishing a sentence. "Congresswoman Doyle," he said, smiling that condescending, camera-friendly grin. "Before you propose to run a state, shouldn't you first apologize for your role in the budget mismanagement scandal? Or are we just pretending that never happened?" There was a moment, not of silence, but of stillness, of air holding its breath. I met his gaze and said slowly and clearly, "I'm not here to prove you wrong. I'm here to do what's right." The room didn't erupt. It paused, then shifted. Like tectonic plates underneath everything, within hours clips were everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, even Reddit, memes, reaction videos, commentaries. The line trended on Google for 3 days straight. "I'm not here to prove you wrong," became a rallying cry, and people who had tuned in to see a takedown saw a transformation instead. But the war behind the curtain didn't stop. One of my field directors pulled me aside the next day, phone in hand. "We traced the IP address of the anonymous finance complaint from last month," she said. "It came from Juliet's law office." I didn't flinch, didn't even respond. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and uploaded the final draft of the clean energy blueprint we'd been building for months. That same afternoon, I stood on the Capitol steps and released it publicly. No dramatics, just a PDF and a press statement. Energy doesn't need enemies, it needs vision. The report was backed by MIT and 3 independent panels across the Midwest. Even my critics had to admit it was airtight. They could leak lies. I would leak light. The video came on a Tuesday. An email with no subject, no sender, just an MP4 attached titled, "For Her to Know." I clicked. The footage was grainy, audio scratchy, like it had been ripped from an old phone. I recognized the room immediately, my mother's sunroom in Omaha. Lace curtains, glass pitcher of lemonade. Juliet's voice opened the clip. "You should really tell her the truth, Mom." Then Sharon Doyle's voice. Calm, clipped, almost cold. "If people find out Rowena was forced to resign because she wouldn't authorize that PAC disbursement for Harkins, we'll be laughed out of Omaha. They'll say we raised a rebel, a fool." Juliet whispered something I couldn't make out. Then Mom again, sharper this time. "She doesn't understand. Politics isn't about being clean, it's about not getting caught." I stopped the video. I drove straight to my mother's house. Didn't call. Didn't warn. When I walked in, Juliet was standing at the sink, rinsing glasses like it was any other Sunday afternoon. Mom was in the armchair reading. She looked up. She didn't panic. She didn't explain. "I thought you wouldn't be strong enough to survive that kind of scandal," she said. "I thought hiding it would protect you." I was wrong. I stood there, arms crossed, heart crashing against my ribs. Juliet dried her hands and walked over to me. She didn't hug me. She handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here," she said. "All the original files, emails, bank transfers. Rick's fingerprints are all over the PAC." I blinked. "Why now?" She shrugged. "Because you're not someone who can be taken down the usual way." She didn't say she was sorry, and somehow, that made it feel more honest. Later that night, back at HQ, my campaign staff argued over the clip. "If you release this," one said, "Rick crashes. Juliet crashes, you win." I sat with the flash drive in my palm, like it weighed 100 pounds. "But what if I don't release it?" I asked. "Will people still choose me?" A junior staffer, barely 24, looked up and said, "They already did." "But people like blood." I walked into the press room the next morning. USB in my blazer pocket. Never took it out. Instead, I released our campaign's full financial report. The final line read, "Total PAC contributions, $0. Donor base, 100% grassroots." Then I looked into the cameras and said, "Some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be lived." That night, at a gala in Lincoln, Rick Langley took the stage. He wore a crisp tuxedo and the usual mask of polished arrogance, but something in his posture had softened. He raised a glass and said, "We are entering a time of change. And sometimes, the person who scares us most is the one we should have listened to all along." He didn't say my name, but every person in that room knew. And for once, I didn't need to be named to be known. The marble floors of the state capitol echoed under my heels as I walked into the hearing chamber. The gallery above was packed. Journalists, lobbyists, even a few faces I recognized from the old days. Cameras lined the back wall. Microphones blinked red. The energy buzzed like a storm before lightning. Everyone was waiting for a name, a takedown, a final swing. I gave them none of that. "I've called this special hearing," I began, standing behind the podium, "not to settle personal scores, but to illuminate patterns that have long gone unchecked." Behind me, the screen lit up, charts appeared, sharp and factual. A 12-year trail of PAC funding flows, millions redirected in tight loops through shell construction firms, all leading back to a network of 3 legal offices. One of those addresses, unmistakably, was Juliet's. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. "I'm not here to expose individuals," I said evenly. "I'm here to expose the habits that hide in plain sight." Then came the proposal that truly changed the room. "We're launching the Truth Ledger," I continued, "an open-source platform that uses blockchain verification to publicly log every state financial transaction, bid, contract, and passee contribution. Real-time access. Real-time accountability. No edits. No shadows." There was a pause, silent and seismic. A senator muttered, "This would make backroom deals nearly impossible." I nodded. That's the idea. I ended the session with no dramatics, just facts and future. That evening, the dominoes began to fall. Juliet announced an indefinite leave from her law firm, citing personal reassessment. Rick Langley stepped down from his re-election campaign, claiming he wanted more time with family. I made no comment. Instead, I issued a single-line press release. My priority remains finishing Nebraska's clean energy roadmap. No name is bigger than our shared future. And then, just when I thought the dust had settled, a letter arrived. A real letter. Paper. Ink. No return address. It was from Ryder, the student I once defended in a town that tried to make him invisible. "I remember that broken swing you promised to fix," he wrote. "But you did more than that. You made us believe the swing was always meant to be ours." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Some victories don't come with applause. They come in the quiet confirmation that someone, somewhere, was watching and is no longer afraid. Knox Hill Park smelled like beginnings. The cherry trees, young, staked, and eager, trembled in the spring wind. It was a Sunday. The sky was a soft, impossible blue, and I was just a woman sitting alone on a bench. No entourage, no camera crew. Just a notebook in my lap, and a pen that had bled through more speeches than I could count. The bench I sat on was marked with a plaque that read, "You don't need their permission to belong." I wrote slowly, deliberately, as if each word had weight. The letter was addressed to the first freshman class of Doyle Public Academy, a new community school on the edge of town, built where an abandoned factory once stood. I was halfway through a sentence about resilience when I heard soft footsteps. A little girl, maybe 9, hovered nearby. She had a high ponytail and wore a hoodie 3 sizes too big. She studied me with cautious wonder. "Are you the mayor?" she asked. I smiled, leaning down to her level. "No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who cleans up messes." I reached into my coat pocket and handed her a small paper bag of wildflower seeds. "Plant these where it matters," I said. "You'll be surprised what grows." She ran off, clutching the seeds like treasure, and I turned back to my letter. That week, news outlets speculated about my future. "Likely pick for Secretary of Energy," one headline read. Another, "Could Nebraska's quiet powerhouse make a run for Senate?" I declined every interview. I answered every inquiry with the same line. "I don't live to climb. I live to untangle. And maybe show others how to do it too." Before I left the park that day, I placed a second letter on the bench, tucking it beneath a smooth stone. It had no envelope, no signature, just these words. For anyone who's ever been told they were too much, too little, too late. We don't need their confession. We just need to build where we belong. I stood, brushed off the dirt from my coat, and walked away. Behind me, a young couple sat down. The woman picked up the letter, read it aloud. Her partner listened. They smiled. They stayed. I didn't turn back. Some people burn bridges, others build swings, plant truth, and let the garden grow. Sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that matter most. Not the applause, not the headlines, but the simple act of standing firm in who you are. Healing isn't loud. Justice isn't always dramatic, and dignity often grows in silence. If this story moved something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, subscribe, or just let me know you're out there. Thank you for listening, for staying, and for believing.